What if I told you that the country receiving more American military aid than any nation in history, more than Afghanistan, more than Egypt, more than any NATO ally, is quietly building a strategy to replace American power in the Middle East with its own? Not someday, not theoretically. Right now, in real time, with your tax dollars funding the transition. This is not political commentary, and it is not a conspiracy theory. Every single thing I'm about to walk you through comes from named institutions, documented government actions, and public record. And by the time you understand what these 5 examples actually mean when you put them together, you will never look at the phrase unbreakable alliance the same way again. Most Americans hear Israel and think ally, a friend, a small democracy surrounded by enemies that depends on American support to survive. And for decades, that picture was close enough to reality that it held. The United States provided the weapons, Israel provided intelligence cooperation and a strategic foothold. Both sides benefited. Both sides understood the terms. But here's what most people miss. That arrangement has been quietly unraveling, not because the friendship collapsed, but because Israel decided the terms no longer serve its interests. And what is replacing it is not a partnership between equals. It is a competition for control of the most strategically valuable region on the planet. The consequences of that competition land directly on your gas prices, your tax bill, and the safety of American soldiers stationed across the Gulf. 5 examples, all sourced. Let me walk you through them. On September 9, 2025, Israeli fighter jets launched missiles into Doha, the capital of Qatar. The target was a Hamas delegation. But the location is what matters here, because Qatar is not an adversary of the United States. It is one of America's most important military partners in the entire Middle East. Al Udeid Air Base sits just outside Doha. Approximately 10,000 American troops are stationed there. It serves as the forward headquarters of U.S. Central Command, the command structure that oversees every American military operation from Egypt to Afghanistan. And just months before the strike, President Trump had personally visited Qatar and secured more than $1.2 trillion in commercial and defense agreements. Israel bombed it anyway. And the way they did it tells you everything about the power dynamic. According to U.S. officials who spoke to CNN, Israel intentionally waited until the last possible minute to notify the Trump administration about the strike, not because of an oversight, not because of operational confusion, because Israeli planners knew that Washington would immediately warn Qatar, and Qatar might warn Hamas. One U.S. official said the notification arrived so close to launch that there was no way to reverse or halt the order. Israel designed the operation to prevent its own ally from interfering. The Hamas delegation that was targeted had gathered to discuss a ceasefire proposal that came directly from the Trump administration. Qatari negotiators had been on the phone with Israeli counterparts until 5 in the morning the night before, working through the details. The United States had specifically asked Qatar to host the Hamas delegation as part of its mediation effort. And then Israel struck the building where those mediators were meeting, during active American diplomacy, on American allied soil, without meaningful American consent. Trump responded on Truth Social with unusual directness. He wrote that the strike was a decision made by Prime Minister Netanyahu, not by him. He called it a unilateral bombing inside a sovereign nation and close ally of the United States that does not advance Israel or America's goals. The UN Security Council condemned the strike unanimously, including the United States, breaking its long-standing pattern of shielding Israel from critical resolutions. Bloomberg reported that Arab leaders across the Middle East immediately began questioning the value of American security guarantees. The logic was devastating in its simplicity. If the United States would defend Gulf partners from Iranian missiles but not from Israeli ones, then there was a hierarchy in the relationship, and every government in the region could see it. That credibility damage landed on America, not on Israel, and it cost the United States diplomatic leverage that took decades to build. The Center for Strategic and International Studies concluded that the strike likely marked the end of Qatar's mediation between Israel and Hamas, a mediation channel that both Washington and Jerusalem had previously relied on. One strike. American diplomacy sabotaged, American credibility damaged, American leverage reduced, and Israel walked away without consequence. When the Assad regime collapsed in December 2024, the Israeli military didn't wait for a phone call from Washington. It moved within hours. IDF forces advanced through a UN-monitored demilitarized buffer zone that had existed since the 1974 disengagement agreement, a framework the United States had helped negotiate, and seized positions on the Syrian side of Mount Hermon. Within weeks, Israel had established at least 9 military posts inside southern Syria. Netanyahu flew to the top of Mount Hermon, put on body armor for the cameras, and called the takeover a temporary defensive position. He did not offer a withdrawal date. Days later, he dropped the pretense entirely and told IDF officer cadets that Israeli forces would remain for an unlimited period of time. Satellite imagery verified by Al Jazeera's SANAD unit between December 2024 and February 2025 showed Israel constructing at least 7 military sites inside the buffer zone and beyond it into Syrian territory. These were not observation posts. Roads were being built. Permanent infrastructure was going up. The Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project reported that by December 2025, Israel had carried out more than 600 attacks across Syria since the invasion, averaging nearly 2 strikes per day. Trump pushed back publicly. He posted on social media expressing concern. Netanyahu responded by calling Trump, and the Israeli readout of the conversation did not mention Syria at all. The subject was simply absorbed. The occupation continued, and then Netanyahu escalated further, demanding a mandatory demilitarized buffer zone stretching from the occupied Golan Heights to the outskirts of Damascus. Not a temporary security perimeter, but a permanent Israeli-controlled corridor across a massive stretch of Syrian territory. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace described what was happening without ambiguity. Israel had turned itself into the main architect of the emerging security reality in the Levant. Not the United States, Israel. A separate analysis in War on the Rocks connected the dots even more explicitly, noting that Israel repeatedly defied the demands of both the Biden and Trump administrations for restraint, expanded its war to other fronts on its own initiative, and was now pursuing regional hegemony through what they called a force-centric revisionist grand strategy. That term, revisionist grand strategy, carries a specific meaning in international relations. It describes a country that has decided the existing order no longer serves its interests and is actively working to replace it with a new one. The United States spent 75 years building the security architecture of the Middle East. Israel is now physically occupying territory, drawing new maps, and establishing military facts on the ground, all without American approval and in some cases directly against American requests. In January 2026, Netanyahu sat for an interview with The Economist and made a statement that should have generated weeks of headlines in America. He said he wanted to taper off American military aid to zero within 10 years. When the interviewer asked if he meant eliminate it completely, Netanyahu said yes. Now here's what most Americans hear when they process that headline, a grateful ally becoming self-sufficient. That framing is exactly what Netanyahu intended. But the actual strategic logic runs in the opposite direction. American military aid has always come with conditions. Those conditions are the primary mechanism Washington uses to influence Israeli behavior. On settlements, on Palestinian statehood, on the conduct of military operations, on arms sales to third parties. Every time an American president wanted to pressure Israel on any issue, the aid package was the lever. Cut the aid, and you cut the lever. War on the Rocks laid this out explicitly. Netanyahu sees ending military assistance as a mechanism to downsize U.S. influence in Israeli decision-making. The analysis noted that Netanyahu made identical arguments during his first term as prime minister in the late 1990s, when his refusal to accept that aid came with conditions reportedly led President Clinton to ask in frustration who the superpower actually was in the relationship. The numbers tell you the scale of what's being restructured. The current Memorandum of Understanding, signed in 2016 under Obama, provides $3.8 billion annually through 2028, $3.3 billion in foreign military financing, and $500 million for missile defense. The Council on Foreign Relations estimates that total U.S. military aid to Israel since 1946 comes to approximately $244 billion. That makes Israel the largest cumulative recipient of American military assistance in history by a wide margin. The next closest is Afghanistan at $133 billion. Netanyahu didn't announce this casually. In December 2025, he had already approved 350 billion shekels, approximately $110 billion over the next decade to build an independent Israeli defense manufacturing base. He described the vision as making Israel a super Sparta. Israeli defense exports had already hit a record $14.7 billion in 2024, the fourth consecutive year of records. Israel Aerospace Industries signed a $3.1 billion deal with Germany for Arrow 3 missile systems, following a previous $3.5 billion Arrow deal that was the largest export contract in Israeli defense industry history. Senator Lindsey Graham, one of the most reliable pro-Israel voices in the U.S. Congress, responded to Netanyahu's announcement by saying there was no need to wait 10 years and that he would work on expediting the wind down to plow the money back into the American military. The IMEU policy project cut through the framing entirely, concluding that the proposal is designed to further enmesh the United States in Israeli military operations while simultaneously removing the leverage that aid conditions provide. Work through that logic. Israel wants to keep the technology sharing, the joint development programs, the intelligence cooperation, and the diplomatic cover. It wants to eliminate the part where Washington gets to set conditions on how Israel uses American support. That is not a country reducing dependency. That is a country restructuring a relationship to maximize its own freedom of action while keeping the other side committed. This example operates on a longer timeline than the others, but the financial implications for American workers, American companies, and American taxpayers are enormous. And almost nobody talks about it. Israel is now the seventh largest arms exporter in the world, according to a March 2026 report from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, accounting for 4.4% of global arms exports. In 2024, Israeli defense exports reached $14.7 billion, a 13% increase over the previous year. Nearly 57% of those deals were mega contracts worth at least $100 million each. And the product categories that dominate Israeli exports, missile defense, air defense, drones, radar, electronic warfare, surveillance, are exactly the same categories where American companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman compete. Here's where the math gets uncomfortable. Israel's Arrow 3 interceptor costs approximately $2 million per unit. The comparable American system, the THAAD interceptor, runs between $12 and $15 million. Industry observers have noted that American manufacturers may not be able to close that cost gap, which means every Arrow 3 deal Israel signs with a European or Asian government is a contract an American company did not win. Germany alone signed more than $10 billion in defense deals with Israel over the past 2 years. Arrow missiles, Heron drones, Spike anti-tank missiles, defense systems for transport aircraft. Abraham Accords countries, the UAE, Morocco, and Bahrain, accounted for 12% of Israeli defense exports in 2024, up from 4% the previous year. Now here's the part that most analysis misses entirely. A 2008 act of U.S. Congress mandates that before any American arms sale to any Middle Eastern country other than Israel, The executive branch must certify that the transfer will not erode Israel's qualitative military edge. In practice, this gives Israel effective veto power over what the United States can sell to its own allies and partners in the region. When President Trump pledged in November 2025 to sell Saudi Arabia top-of-the-line F-35s, that promise ran directly into this legal framework. War on the Rocks described it as a departure from decades of established policy that would inevitably be contested by Israel's allies in Congress. Let those two realities sit side by side. Israel uses American law to restrict what American companies can sell to American allies, and then Israel sells its own competing systems to those same countries and to the rest of the world without any equivalent restriction. Israel limits American market access while expanding its own. That is not the behavior of a dependent partner. That is a competitor operating inside the other team's rulebook. Multiply that dynamic across billions of dollars in global defense contracts, and you start to see the structural impact. American defense jobs, American export revenue, American influence that comes from being a country's weapons supplier, all of it gradually shifting, not to China, not to Russia, but to a country the American taxpayer has been funding for 75 years. This is the most consequential example on this list, because it is unfolding right now, and the financial impact on every American household is already showing up at the gas pump and the grocery store. A March 2026 analysis from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace identified the core divergence in plain language. Trump appears interested in a Venezuela-style model for Iran, aligning with a pragmatic regime insider, accessing oil reserves, avoiding prolonged military commitment. Netanyahu prefers what the analysis called a mowing the grass approach, one that weakens Iran continuously and extends the conflict indefinitely. The report noted that both approaches are fundamentally at odds with each other, especially as Israel increasingly attempts to dictate the terms of the war. The Jerusalem Center for Foreign Affairs described the Israeli strategic calculation in a January 2026 assessment. Israel faces a trade-off, accommodating aspects of U.S. plans in Gaza in exchange for decisive American partnership against Iran, while preserving long-term freedom of action across multiple active fronts. That phrase, freedom of action, is the thread that connects every single example on this list. Every move Israel makes is calibrated to maximize its ability to act independently, while keeping the United States financially and militarily committed to absorbing the consequences. The 2025 U.S. National Security Strategy signaled from Washington's side that the Middle East would no longer dominate day-to-day American foreign policy. The Israel Institute for Counter-Strategy and Governance reported that nearly half of Israelis now believe the United States has more influence over their security decisions than their own government, and that 69% of Israeli weaponry originates from America. That dependency is precisely what Netanyahu's entire restructuring project is designed to eliminate. But here is the immediate cost to you. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Brent crude is trading above $130 a barrel. Gas prices have spiked. Food prices are climbing as fertilizer costs jump. Goldman Sachs has raised U.S. recession odds to 25%. And the strategic objectives driving the conflict, whether to pursue regime change, nuclear disarmament, or a negotiated settlement, are being shaped in significant part by Israeli preferences, not American ones. American soldiers are deployed. American taxpayers are paying, and the strategy reflects Israeli priorities. Now step back from each piece and look at what they form when you connect them. The Qatar strike showed that Israel will attack American allies to pursue its own objectives. The Syrian occupation showed that Israel will seize territory against explicit American requests. The aid phase-out revealed a deliberate plan to remove the primary tool Washington uses to influence Israeli decisions. The defense export machine showed that Israel is displacing American companies in global arms markets while using American law to restrict American sales in the same region. And the Iran divergence exposed two fundamentally different visions for the Middle East, with Israel positioning itself not the United States, as the one that gets to decide what happens next. Each example reinforces the others in ways that matter. Ending aid removes American leverage. Building an independent arms industry funds that independence. Expanding territory creates facts on the ground that American diplomacy must then accommodate. Striking American allies demonstrates that the costs of Israeli unilateralism fall on American credibility, and dictating war aims ensures that American money and American lives underwrite a strategy that serves Israeli interests first. The honest assessment requires precision. Israel faces genuine threats. The security environment is real. Many elements of U.S.-Israel cooperation produce legitimate benefits for both countries. Nobody serious argues that the alliance should be discarded. But what these 5 examples demonstrate, taken together, viewed as a system, is a partner that has decided the existing terms of the relationship no longer serve its interests and is systematically rebuilding the arrangement to maximize its own strategic independence while keeping the United States locked in as the financial and military backstop for the consequences. That is not partnership. That is leverage. The question every American taxpayer should sit with is straightforward. In this alliance, who is setting the terms, and whose wallet is paying for the answer? Share this with someone you care about, because understanding what is actually happening between these two governments right now is not a luxury. It is the starting point for every good decision you will make about your finances, your community, and your country going forward. The next video goes deeper into what this power shift means for your gas prices and your retirement account over the next 12 months. Drop your questions below.